wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. And it's the countdown to the next elimination from the race to become our future Prime Minister. Keeping me company today is political scientist extraordinaire, Mr. Matthew Goodwin. And who better to have here while we navigate the febrile world of that leadership race? Stay tuned for this. The second ballot of MPs to pick the next Tory leader and our Prime Minister closed half an hour ago. We are expecting the results at the end of the show, so there's lots to discuss. Who's backing who said what, and who is best placed to run the country. And they're all talking about it, how to cure the cost of living crisis hammering the country. The first round of direct relief payments from the government lands in accounts today. And despite all the chaos, Nicola Sturgeon is agitating for a second Scottish independence referendum this October. Is she crackers? It's politics-tastic for the next hour as we wait for that crucial leadership vote result, so don't go anywhere. Get in touch as we keep you up to date on GB Views at gbnews.uk or join the conversation on Twitter at GB News. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has launched her Conservative leadership campaign, saying she wants Britain to become an aspiration nation. 6 contenders remain in the battle to replace Boris Johnson: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, Liz Truss, Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch. Ballots are being counted as we speak, following voting in the second round, and the result is expected at 3. Liz Truss says she can be trusted to deliver.
You can trust me to get the economy going, to get money back in people's pockets and to help squeezed families. Together, we will level up the country in a Conservative way, making it an aspiration nation. Together, we will continue to defy the voices of decline and stand tall on the world stage.
Scotland's First Minister says the UK is facing a shift to the right, whoever becomes the next Prime Minister. Nicola Sturgeon was speaking as she launched a second paper aimed at making a fresh case for Scotland to leave the UK. She says independence is now essential.
None of them seem to have anything to offer Scotland except democracy denial. So I don't see any of them offering anything positive for Scotland at all, and that's the problem. Scotland is facing yet another Prime Minister, the fourth in my time as First Minister, that we haven't voted for, would not vote for, and that will impose policies that we don't support.
Train drivers at 8 rail companies will go on strike on the 30th of July in a dispute over pay. That's in addition to a strike by RMT members on the 27th of this month. The Train Drivers Union ASLEF is demanding a pay rise in line with inflation. The Department for Transport says drivers already earn significantly more than the average salary in the UK. 3 men accused of being leading members of an organised crime group have been charged with people smuggling offences. They were among 4 people arrested by the National Crime Agency in East London and Essex on Tuesday. They're accused of attempting to smuggle people into the UK in the back of lorries. Kevin Spacey has pleaded not guilty to sexual assault charges at the Old Bailey. The Oscar-winning actor's accused of 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. He goes on trial next June. Low-income households will start receiving £326 from today, the first of 2 payments to ease the cost of living crisis. A second instalment of £324 will be transferred in the autumn. It's part of the government's £37 billion support package. Alan Driver, who's already received the payment, told GB News even the essentials are too expensive.
Everybody's had to go buy cheaper products, not name brands. And it's just detrimental, you know. People need a little something, make them feel good every now and then in life, you know. Whether that be a haircut, whether that be getting your nails done, or whether that be a bit of ice cream, you know. You know when that sound comes outside your door and that ice cream, and you can't buy the ice cream. That's sad. That's sad.
To Ukraine, at least 20 people, including 3 children, are thought to have been killed and many more injured after Russian missiles struck the central city of Vinnytsia today. Ukraine's president says a medical centre and several houses were among the buildings destroyed. Volodymyr Zelensky's condemned the attack, calling it an open act of terrorism. In Turkey, more than 3,500 people have been evacuated after wildfires spread to residential areas. They've also hit other parts of Europe, including France and Portugal, where there's a second heatwave. Meanwhile, back here, a COBRA emergency committee meeting's been called to discuss the measures in place to deal with the extreme temperatures expected here over the weekend. And Emirates Airline has refused to cancel flights at Heathrow after the airport capped the number of daily passengers at 100,000. Emirates says Heathrow only gave 36 hours to comply and that rebooking passengers was impossible because all of its flights are full over the coming weeks. Heathrow says it would be disappointing if any airline puts profit before passenger safety. This is GB News. We'll bring more as it happens now, though. It's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About.
Well, in the next hour, we will be a step closer to knowing who will be the country's next Prime Minister. Many of the candidates have been setting out their stall on domestic politics. Meanwhile, Russia said it will now allow grain from Ukraine to get to 400 million desperate people, narrowly averting global famine. It sent the EU's finances into free fall by threatening to completely cut off gas this winter. Joe Biden's rolling over to Iran, who's mugging off the West as he tries to revive the nuclear deal while they're enriching uranium and sending weapons to Russia. China's flooding our universities with students, some, no doubt, to glean inside information and infiltrate our research. But our institutions are cash-strapped. They're also buying Russian oil like Billio and sticking military bases everywhere as they blackmail third-world countries. All of them have troll farms where they try to hack Western infrastructure and spark culture wars. It's clear all of these countries have a radical global strategy. And so should we. For too long, we've been napping, navel-gazing and backsliding. Today, every single topic being debated in the leadership contest, energy policy, trade, defence spending, even education, the online safety bill and anti-woke ideology, all lead back to the bigger picture of a dangerous and rapidly shifting change in the world order. Unless we get a Prime Minister who really gets this, we're in serious trouble. Well, joining me first on the show is GB News' own political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, get us up to date. What's the latest?
Well, of course, as you were mentioning earlier, Alex, voting has closed and it's not long now, less than an hour, until we find out these results. And it's worth going over the process of this leadership election. Today is the second ballot of MPs. Yesterday, two candidates didn't meet that threshold of 30 MPs to progress to today. Today, there is no threshold. It's simply the last placed candidate is eliminated from the race. Now, the hope of the organisers of this contest was that some other candidates might see which way the wind is blowing and voluntarily pull out. That happened last time around in 2019 with more than one candidate voluntarily leaving at each stage in the race. Although, looking at the way things are going, it's unlikely that we're going to see a voluntary dropout at this stage, especially as there is a weekend of campaigning to go. The next ballot, not tomorrow, but Monday. So really quite some time for those who make it over the threshold today to stay in this race and put across their case. And that's going to be a compelling vision for many of them. But yes, of course, the last placed candidate today will be eliminated. And who is in the running? Well, it looks like we're fairly certain to say that Rishi Sunak is picking up some support. Some people have declared for him today. He remains the first place candidate. It would be very surprising if he weren't the first place candidate at the end of today as well. He's followed by Penny Mordaunt, who had a remarkably strong day yesterday, although today her campaign has hit a few bumps in the road, not least Lord Frost this morning saying that, implying basically that she is an incompetent person to work with. Well, we'll see whether that has hit Penny Mordaunt's campaign, whether the momentum has slowed down or not. And of course, Liz Truss launched her campaign today as well. She's currently in third place. It will be interesting to see if she can remain in third place. Her campaign really trying to solidify herself as the clear candidate of the right of centre view in this contest, although she's challenged closely by Kemi Badenoch, who was 10 votes behind her yesterday, who is trying to close that gap, or at least add on as much today, although it's a tall task for her, of course, only having decided to stand in this election late in the day, never having held a post in cabinet either. The next person in the race is also someone who's never held a post in cabinet. It's Tom Tugendhat. He's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and he has a small but strong backing. Whether he makes it across is potentially being weighed up there, because next to him is, of course, the Attorney General Suella Braverman, and she is probably the candidate along with Tom Tugendhat. Those are the two that are most likely to be fearing getting eliminated this time around. Suella Braverman has the strong support of people like Steve Baker, who is chairing the Conservative Way Forward pressure group within the party, and has had very strong lines on areas of policy, pitching herself as the most Conservative candidate in the race. Will it be enough to be a broad enough appeal to get more MPs on side? Potentially not. But those three candidates vying to be the candidate of the right there, Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, and of course Liz Truss. Whether one of them goes out and who those supporters will then go to is a very hard game to guess, because this is a relatively sophisticated electorate. Some might say it's a relatively treacherous electorate, and others may say that people have their own reasons for backing people rather than just following the leader of the group they were backing before. It may splinter in all sorts of directions.
In times, Tom, we'll be speaking to you a bit later, no doubt. Thank you so much for all your hard work, keeping you busy, aren't we? Well, joining me now on the show is Conservative political commentator Joanne Nadler and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Joanne, I'm going to come to you first, because one thing that strikes me is this is going to be the successor to Boris Johnson. And the last leadership campaign seemed to me about, the big personality, the rhetoric that won the hearts and minds of the party. But it's less of a personality contest this time round.
In some senses, I agree with you. That's certainly true, because in comparison with Boris Johnson, it would be very difficult for somebody to have a personality on that kind of epic scale of the outgoing Prime Minister, wouldn't it? But in another way, I'm not so sure about that, because not a great deal is known about some of the candidates. And I think people are supporting them slightly on a wing and a prayer and giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I include myself in that, because I'm very, very supportive of Kemi Badenoch. I think she's by far the best candidate in the race, but I accept that she isn't particularly well known. And I think in the case of Penny Mordaunt, for instance, who's clearly got momentum behind her, and her campaign is gaining pace, it would appear at the moment, I think that is partly to do with her personality and the fact that she presents so well and she comes across as being extremely nice woman, affable, easy to get on with. I think it's as much to do in her case with the whole persona of Penny Mordaunt as it is to do with anything particularly that she's saying. So, I think there's some truth in that, but it's also the case that we still need to know a lot more about all of these candidates.
I'm going to go to you, Peter. It strikes me that everyone's saying that whoever becomes the next Prime Minister, they're going to represent a shift to the right. There seems to be a doubling down on who can be the next Margaret Thatcher. Do you think that that could result in the Red Wall seats going back to Labour?
Well, I think Labour have got to be very wary of making that assumption, but clearly there's an opportunity. And I think there will be a shift for both the reasons you touched upon. First of all, a shift in personality. And obviously we saw that from Thatcher to Major. That was from a very strong person, someone who's seen as more consensual. Then from Cameron to May, a PR smoothie, Cameron was cast at, to someone who was seen as a bit more real world and earthy in Theresa May. But as you say, also in the policies, and of course perhaps as a Labour person, the thing I come back to is that you're going to have the next Prime Minister chosen by around 350 MPs who aren't representative of the public. And then the Conservative membership, which last time I checked is in the relatively low hundreds of thousands. So that obviously, that prompts of a question of whether you have a general election, but neither of those groups, the selectorate as it's called, are really representative of public opinion. And Labour has to work out an intelligent attack on that above and beyond just saying this person's right wing or this person's elite, because that's not really worked for my party in the past.
Yeah, and it's interesting what Peter was saying there, Joanne. I mean, we have started looking at these leadership contests a bit like a presidential campaign. And in presidential campaigns, of course, people pick running mates. Talk to us a little bit about the trade-offs that will be happening in the corridors of power right now. The discussions about if you finish your campaign and back mine, I'll give you a front bench position.
Well, of course. I mean, there will be elements of that going on. And as much as we try and sit here and, if you like, analyse these races based on what you might consider objective criteria, such as the policies and who voted for what in the past. There is that human element to it. You know, in many cases, you know, people will be voting for their friends, or people will be voting for somebody who's in a neighbouring constituency or something like that. I mean, I can't remember now which candidate it was and which of his supporters, but I did hear an MP the other day make a great public case for his particular preferred candidate simply on the basis that he was a friend. And I felt, well, that's, you know, okay up to a point, but it doesn't really mean much beyond the two of you. So, I mean, there are all sorts of issues that will be guiding the minds of MPs. And as you say, being very cynical about it, you know, their future preferment in whose ever government will be part of that. We've already seen that Nadeem Sahawi, who dropped out yesterday, he has not endorsed another candidate, which one might suggest means he's keeping his powder dry, or it could be that he's keeping his options open.
Indeed, he seems to be a man who's changed his mind a lot on things lately. Joanne, Peter, thank you ever so much for joining me today. Well, let's talk now to my presenter friend for the day, the one and only Dr. Matthew Goodwin. Well, let's talk about some of the runners and riders here briefly. Sunak, his wealth, is it an issue?
I think it is an issue. We've had wealthy politicians in the past. This is something different. Rishi Sunak and his wife are about twice as wealthy as the Queen. There are question marks around blind trusts, his wife's non-dom status. And I think actually, you know, Alex, remember the moment we're in, right? We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got a serious economic a crisis unfolding. We've got one of the hardest winters in this country for a very long time. I wonder actually whether Rishi Sunak, as we saw in the polling this week, whether Rishi Sunak can really hold that red wall that is so important to the Conservative Party vote. And I was struck last night looking at the runoff polling. You know, Sunak loses both to Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss, and also, we shouldn't forget, I think, who is the most interesting candidate in this race, Kemi Badenoch. I think, you know, he also loses to her in that polling. So, you know, this is ultimately, I think, a candidate that may come unstuck.
And in terms of Liz Truss, she launched her campaign today, ripping on her surname Truss and talking about trust. But this is the woman who said, as Foreign Secretary, we should be pre-arming Taiwan, which seems a little bit live wire-ish to me.
I think if you talk to Conservative Party MPs and some members, prominent members, I think there are concerns around Liz Truss's campaign. I think she is, even now, somewhat of an unknown quantity in the Conservative Party. I think there are, some pretty open public questions about her judgment on certain issues. Also, her communication style. Some people say, she's a sort of Theresa May 2.0 that struggles to project the kind of charisma, but also the kind of coherent intellectual type thinking that perhaps others have displayed. I don't know Liz Truss personally, but that sort of talk is pretty widespread in Westminster. And then on the other hand, you've got somebody like Penny Mordaunt, and I think a lot of people are projecting onto Mordaunt probably what they hope or think she is, rather than stepping back and perhaps looking at what she has said on the record. And some of those things, of course, around identity issues do not sit comfortably with the Conservative Party membership. I expect to hear a lot more about that in the coming week or so if she makes it through.
Yeah, there's been some very sophisticated campaigning and a lot of attacks against Penny Mordaunt at the moment. She is seen as a clear threat to Rishi Sunak. I mean, would it be so cynical of me to suggest that that's probably coming from his team?
I think, to be honest with you, it's coming from a lot of people. There is a big fear, Alex, that I think probably some of your viewers would relate to, of a leadership final round of the contest between Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt, which would essentially leave the right of the party homeless, without a candidate. And there are a lot of people saying, well, after Brexit, after Johnson, in this new era that we're in British politics, is it right that that large chunk of the party now enters into the final round without any direct representation? And you remember this as well as I will. The 2010s, we saw the right in British politics fragment in a big, big way. My worry for the Conservative Party is if it does go down that line, actually, that we'll see another big fragmentation on the right of British politics.
Yeah, and maybe some entryists coming back, you never know. I want to know your views as well, so do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet to the programme @GBNews. Which is your favourite horse in the race, and which one do you want to see fall at the next hurdle? You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the first government cost of living payment hits bank accounts today. But will this be enough as the crisis worsens? Time for a short break now. See you in a bit.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
You know, it's a pretty radical measure from a Tory government. Direct payments to help with the soaring cost of living are dropping into the accounts of some 8 million people from today. The cash will automatically land in the banks of those on means-tested benefits. £326 by the end of July and another £324 in the autumn. Radical socialists must be jumping for joy. I'm not saying this money isn't desperately needed by many. It is. But it shows that when you mess with communism, you create a communist mess, only often treated by more communism, unless you cold turkey a country off the drug of handouts. Where will it end? Meanwhile, so many industries are desperately short of workers. Just look at airport chaos, begging the question of whether we're now on a slippery slope to self-destructive socialism. Funny that the cost of living crisis finds its origins in Chinese laboratories and Russian gas fields. The two titans of communism now gung-ho on global capitalism, while we splutter into decline. So, 1 in 4 families will have £326 sent directly to them from today as part of that government's cost of living payment scheme. But as our South West of England reporter Geoff Moody reports, there is still some confusion about who gets it.
Natalie and Alex came over from Ukraine back in May. For them, food banks are the difference between feeding their family and going hungry.
We have 3 children, and for us it's a very great support to get some food because children are eating a lot, especially corns and milk and some vegetables. Chocolate, yeah. And because we haven't found any job here, we are looking for it. It's a very great support to us.
Support too for 135 families across the New Forest. Before the pandemic, the New Forest Basics Bank was catering for just 25.
You hope that our economy generally will improve and that will help us. But at the moment, people are being hit from all different directions, and that's making life very difficult for them.
But help is on hand. The government is forking out £37 billion to help the hardest hit by the cost of living crisis. 8 million families could be waking up to a payment of £326 today, straight into their bank accounts, with the same again planned for the autumn. That's 1 in every 4 households. But there's a catch. The government wants to stagger the payment over several weeks so that the system can cope. So some households will have to wait till the end of the month before the payment drops. Other families won't get the payments at all. To receive the payment, households will need to have been claiming universal credit between the end of April and the end of May. If you've been earning during this time, your payments will go down. So too if you haven't received tax credits. And for pensioners, you will receive £300 if you qualify for winter fuel payments. It's a welcome boost for many, but Oliver Stanley from the Food Bank thinks there's no quick fix.
I'd love this place to be full of dust and mice, you know, and there'd be no use for it.
Do you foresee that happening?
No, I don't. I don't foresee that happening in the near future.
For many, the near future is all they can hope for, and they're grateful.
And thank you, Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Thoughts of long term are a luxury few can afford. Jam today, but jam tomorrow is another matter. Geoff Moody, GB News.
Well, a charity in London is attempting to combat the ongoing cost of living crisis by offering people a free financial meeting. Debt Free London offers the public advice on everything from debt to rent. Let's hear from our GB News reporter Rosie, who's on Peckham High Street. Rosie, tell us more.
Good afternoon to you, Alex. Yes, I've spent the day speaking to a variety, actually, of organisations that have one real aim, which is to get people out of debt. What they've both reported to me, so that's Debt Free London, where I was this morning, but also Christians Against Poverty, both organisations run networks across the UK that provide free, impartial financial advice, is that there is a significant increase in the people who need their services. And when we're talking about people struggling with the cost of living, as we've just heard heard from Jeff's report there, this isn't about deciding to cut back on some of those luxury items in the supermarket. They're saying for them, luxury is having their hair cut. These are people who really, really are struggling, are currently on debt repayment plans. And when they look at all of their outgoings and their essential bills and their priority bills, things like council tax, even with things like the council tax rebate that we'll all be eligible for if you're in council tax bands A to D, they just don't have disposable income left for things like food. Well, I spoke to Alan earlier this morning. He's one of the people who woke up to a notification that £326 would be arriving in his bank account, and there it was. But even with that, he said he's still struggling.
I think the essentials should not be that expensive. They're putting the price up left, right and centre. Heinz are taking the mick. Even Tesco's has chucked out Heinz. Sorry, but you know, it's the way it is. And everybody's had to go buy cheaper products, not name brands, and it's just detrimental. You know, people need a little something, make them feel good every now and then in life. You know, whether that be a haircut, whether that be getting your nails done, or whether that be a bit of ice cream. You know when that sound comes outside your door and that ice cream, and you can't buy the ice cream. That's sad. That's sad.
Well, they just, if you've got a tight budget to spend on your shopping that week, month to month, if those go up, there's just no room in the budget for that to stretch to that. Or if your electricity bills go up, there's just no wriggle room. So something has to give, and that's when you're more prone to get into debt, because you won't pay a priority bill or something that you need to because you need to eat that week, or you need to pay your electricity, or you actually need to cook the food that you have. So it's so tight for people, and then with everything going up, it's just not enough.
So we heard from Alan there first, one of the over 8 million people who receive that £650. And then from Mel. She's a debt advisor at Christians Against Poverty, but she said to me, we are looking at people's outgoings and we are just finding that it's untenable. Some people are on benefits, and the benefits that they're receiving aren't enough to pay their bills. With that in mind, this £650, it helps in the short term, but in the long term, for people in real financial difficulty with spiralling costs of living, it just isn't enough.
Rosie, thank you ever so much. Rosie Wright there, reporting from Peckham High Street. Matthew, what are your thoughts on this? Because one thing that strikes me is this juxtaposition of all of the leadership contenders of racing to the bottom to be the most right-wing economically, tax cuts. And then you've got this sort of other image of a government giving handouts to people. How much has pandemic policy now shifted the political sands?
Well, I think it's certainly the case that COVID sort of led to this massive expansion of both the state and the tax burden. Many Conservatives, if you talk to them in Westminster, are quick to say we've got the highest tax burden now since the 1940s, 1950s, at the same time as we've got this big expansion of the state. And also, as you alluded to in your opening statement, a lot of Conservatives are saying, well, look at the welfare burden now in the UK. You've got really a lot of people who are dependent upon the state who really are not sort of, developing individual responsibility, and not sort of getting out and entering into the labour market, which was also being exacerbated by COVID, the sort of great resignation, not really pulling people back into the labour market. And this has got really putting a tension at the heart of the Conservative Party. So if you've got candidates on the one hand saying, well, look, we're going to slash taxes, slash the state, we're going to get back to Margaret Thatcher-style economics. But on the other hand, I've heard very little about how they're going to reform the welfare state. I've heard very little about how they're going to reform the NHS, how they're going to boost productivity, how they're going to boost economic growth. These big, long-term questions are not being addressed. One study this morning, Alex, showed that voters in the Red Wall are 340 quid worse off each year than voters in the South. We should be talking about that in the leadership race. Who's got a plan for that?
Who does have a plan for? Who's a plan for anything, Matthew? We'll be talking about that a lot later as well. Thank you so much. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Now, Nicola Sturgeon is again pushing a second independence referendum for Scotland. We'll get reaction to that. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
It's coming up to 2:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Voting has just closed in the second round of the Conservative leadership contest. 6 contenders remain in the battle to replace Boris Johnson: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, Liz Truss, Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch. They'll be whittled down, though, when the results are announced at around 3 o'clock. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss launched her campaign this morning, saying she wants Britain to be an aspiration nation. Scotland's First Minister says the UK is facing a shift to the right, whoever becomes the next Prime Minister. Nicola Sturgeon was speaking as she launched a second paper aimed at making a fresh case for Scotland to leave the UK. She says independence is now essential. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has landed in Singapore after fleeing mass protests over his country's economic meltdown. Singapore's foreign ministry says he's entered the country on a private visit and hasn't sought asylum. Rajapaksa has yet to resign, despite promising to do so on Wednesday, which has triggered yet more protests. Train drivers at 8 rail companies will go on strike on the 30th of July in a dispute over pay. That's in addition to a strike by RMT members on the 27th of July. The train drivers' union ASLEF is demanding a pay rise in line with inflation. The Department for Transport says drivers already earn significantly more than the average salary in the UK. In Turkey, more than 3,500 people have been evacuated after wildfires spread to residential areas. They've also hit other parts of Europe, including France and Portugal, where there's a second heat wave. Meanwhile, back here, a COBRA emergency committee meeting has been called to discuss the measures in place to deal with an extreme temperatures expected over the weekend. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
You know, she's like a defiant toddler playing with a priceless vase. Can you just stop, Nicola? There's a whole load of mess already going on without you constantly trying to get attention. And so, Sturgeon is ploughing ahead with her rabid referendum plan, forgetting, it seems, she lost one not even a decade ago. Well, frankly, it doesn't seem the polling has changed a jot. If anything, it's less in her favour. But she's determined to waste tens of millions on a vote in October, right when people won't be able to pay for their heating and will be turning into icicles in Inverness. as Putin also tests the will of the new UK Prime Minister as to what happens to the nuclear deterrent. Does she really think, in the middle of this global mayhem, Scotland, with an economy essentially resembling Zimbabwe in the 90s, is somehow going to be better by severing the financial umbilical cord with Blighty? Her big problem would be if we actually called her bluff and she won the vote. I doubt you'd ever see someone scuttle from office to the garden shed to start writing autobiographies so fast. Well, joining me now is GB News Scotland reporter Davy Donaldson. Davy, what's the latest on this today? She's published something, hasn't she?
Yeah, that's right. She's come out and published a second paper. I have to say that it's not exactly earth-shattering stuff. It wasn't something that we didn't already know from the last time we spoke to her about 2 weeks ago. So nothing really new at all. The only thing's the same drum that she keeps beating as well. So she hopes the court's decision clears the path for a referendum in October next year. She says if the referendum is blocked, we'll put the choice to the people of Scotland during a vote in the general election. What difference that makes, I'm not really sure, and whether she actually even gets that far, given obviously the legal process we're going through at the moment, is anyone's guess. She says if that fails, then she will put it to the general election when that happens. But she's all for a general election, she said. She was asked if she fancied one, and she said she didn't think it would happen, but she did said bring it on. So certainly very happy to have that general election now, should that be the case, a snap general election. On the Tory leadership, she said, she was asked about the Tory leadership battle at the moment. She says they're all pretty bad to me. It's not for me to rank them. And then she said Scotland wouldn't elect any of them as PM. It's a deeply undemocratic process. All of them will move the Tories to the right. So she's had a say in that. She did say as well, though, she was asked about perhaps some sort of compromise. She said that she'd spoken to David Cameron during obviously the previous referendum talks when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and they sat around the table, and she said not everyone got what they wanted, but they got something. So she did say, made a message to the new Prime Minister, whoever that may be, that she's willing to do that. She's willing to come to some sort of compromise, but she said you wouldn't compromise on having a vote on the referendum. So I'm not sure where the compromise is there.
And thank you ever so much for bringing us that report from Scotland. Well, joining me now on the show is former member of the Scottish Parliament, Brian Monteith, a man who never minces his words. Brian, I mean, look, Nicola Sturgeon wants independence for Scotland. We know that. It says it on the tin. But why is she doing this now? There's a cost of living crisis. Heaven forfend, Russia is testing our mettle. And there she goes, sabre-rattling over Scottish independence. What's she up to?
Well, the whole thing for Nicola Sturgeon is actually to keep her troops happy. This is red meat for nationalists. It's not about trying to win people over who may have some doubts, who might think, yes, let's have a referendum because I might have changed my mind. No, this is about picking the scab of grievance. She's like a petulant child wanting attention all the time and does so by picking that scab. And so by bringing out a constant flood of papers behind a legal case that she has instituted is about keeping her profile up. Ultimately, she cannot deliver the referendum. She knows this, but she needs to look like she's trying to do it. Meanwhile, she's networking in the background to look for her escape to another job, because Nicola Sturgeon will not be First Minister after the next election is held.
I mean, there were some pretty astonishing scenes in Prime Minister's questions yesterday of two MPs from the Alba Party, Alex Salmond's sort of rival outfit, his breakaway group. Is there really an appetite right now, do you think, in Scotland for this debate to be taking place? Or is everyone too busy worried about nuclear war and how they're going to put their heating on?
I think people's priorities are the cost of lockdown crisis. It's the lockdown that essentially inflated the economy and has fed into the restrictions that in supply chains. And people are obviously desperate about that. It's the net zero policy, which has pushed up energy costs and will push them up even further. And people want help and want to debate how that is going to be sorted. What they're not interested in is a referendum. And polling of nationalists, of SNP supporters, even shows it's not a priority for them. As I say, you come back to it, it's all about the petulant child that is Nicola Sturgeon picking the scab of grievance so that she can maintain herself in the headlines.
Brian Monteith, always lovely having you on the show. Brian Monteith there is an MSP and a Brexit Party MEP with me, in fact. Well, let's go back to my presenter friend for the show today, Dr. Matthew Goodwin. Matthew, I mean, is this going to work in her favour? Is this going to boost her personal ratings? Or are people just going to think, why now?
Well, I agree with everything Brian has said. I mean, if you look at the polling, the appetite for a second referendum just isn't there. The support for independence actually isn't there, contrary to Sturgeon's expectation that Johnson and a Conservative government would drive this big boost in support for independence, upwards of 60%, which is what she would really need before going into a referendum campaign. It's not there. I mean, the latest polls have it at about 47, 48%. So I think that's one factor. The other, and you've alluded to this, the argument for independence has become so much harder since Brexit for all kinds of reasons. You know, the response of the European Union. Why would the European Union allow Scotland to join? The lack of a hard border with the European Union, the direction of Scotland's economy, the continued dependence of Scotland on the rest of the UK for fiscal transfers, and also the fact that if you poll Scots, I spend a lot of my time polling voters, they're not dominated by this issue of independence. They want to talk about cost of living, what's happening to Scotland's healthcare system, what's happening to Scotland's schools. Now, you know, these are the issues that I think the SNP will have to get on top of first before swinging people around to this question of independence.
Now, very briefly, I mean, I was interested in something Brian Monteith said there, which is that she's running around behind the scenes networking to get a new job. If Nicola Sturgeon goes, does that mean essentially this big push to get another referendum will go? Is there someone with that same sort of stature waiting in the wings to take over?
Well, the SNP itself will always agitate for a second referendum, but I can't see anybody that has the weight and the charisma that Sturgeon has had among her own supporters. And of course, Labour are beginning to make some headway in Scotland. We saw the Conservatives do very well in Scotland only a couple of elections ago. It just seems to me that the shine on the SNP is beginning to become a little bit less visible, and that actually the argument seems to be moving on. We want to talk about other things as a country. We want to talk about cost of living crisis, inflation, you know, what's over the corner. We need a big economic strategy for boosting growth and driving productivity. I just don't get the sense that she's going to be able to get this over the line.
No, me neither. Thank you, Matthew. You've been sending in your thoughts throughout the show today. Harold says, not a lot to say. Well, why did you message? But apart from the fact that Tory MPs have stitched the British public up yet again. What a choice. Truss, Sunak and Mordaunt. This is the icing on the cake. Brexit will be a name only. Oh, Harold, let's not hope so. Anne says, I'm not convinced that Penny is the one. Her views on gender issues and women are completely wrong, and most women in this country would agree. A lot of people agreeing with you there. John says, complete mind change for me. I think Suella ticks all the boxes. Well, she's going to face some tough competition. Let's see if she hangs on in 13 minutes' time when we're expecting the results of that vote today. Lee says, I am so sick of Nicola Sturgeon. Seems like a lot of people are. Why is she so obsessed with ripping our country apart? How can you have a second once in a lifetime, once in a generation referendum vote, 8 years after the first? Or maybe she's doing it in dog years. Now, after the break, we are awaiting the results of the second vote in the Tory leadership campaign for who will become our next Prime Minister. So don't go anywhere. We'll be discussing that in the countdown to that result. Back with you shortly.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Cloudy skies and some showers in the north today, feeling cooler here. But there will still be some warm sunshine in the south. The reason being high pressure remains close by. It is edging closer to the UK over the next few days. But around the top of that high, well, we've currently got cooler conditions, cloudier weather from the Atlantic and some showers. Those showers on the heavy side in places, particularly over the Pennines, the higher parts of Scotland as well. But through the evening, they die away. Clear skies in the south through the day, extending fairly widely at first overnight, but then another area of cloud moves in, turning things a bit more damp across western and central Scotland, Northern Ireland by the end of the night. 13 or 14 Celsius in the north, 11 to 13 Celsius overnight in the south with the clear skies. So not an oppressive night for sleeping, a bit more comfortable than, say, earlier in the week. A bright start, though, for southern areas first thing, and after any early rain across Scotland and northern England clears away, well, skies brighten here as well, with a few showers developing. It looks like a sunnier day for Northern Ireland, 20 Celsius here, 24 in Cardiff, 27 in London, where it will also be sunny, but showers will keep it cooler for central and southern Scotland and northern England. And those showers continue into Friday evening before eventually it turns drier. And what's happening later Friday is high pressure is starting to build more widely across the UK. There'll still be some cloudier skies and some rain in the far northwest of Scotland, but otherwise clear skies across much of the country. And it's turning warmer, 16 Celsius as we start Saturday in London. Saturday starts off with plenty of sunshine as that high pressure re-exerts its influence across the UK. Still some rain in the far north of Scotland, but otherwise Sunday and Monday increasing amounts of sunshine and, more significantly, increasing temperatures.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, the results of the second round of voting in the race to be the next Tory leader and our future Prime Minister is about to be announced, so do stay tuned with the contender with the least votes set to be cast out of the contest. Matthew, while we're waiting for that, let's go back and talk about some of these runners and riders. There are two people I think people are saying could be the one who doesn't get, gets the lowest amounts of votes and doesn't get through to the next round. Those would be Suella Benjamin and Tom Tugendhat. Two very different propositions there.
Yeah, well, indeed, Tom Tugendhat is a One Nation conservative, appeals to the more sort of centrist, sort of liberal wing of the party, if you want to say that. Suella Braverman is obviously a candidate that is coming from that ERG position, hardline on Brexit, wants to withdraw from the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, European Convention on Human Rights, and is somebody that is really pitching to the red wall. Close to Kemi Badenoch, of course. Now, were she to go out, that would, in theory, I think, bolster Kemi's campaign. Many of those people, I suspect, would fall behind Kemi. Tom Tugendhat's people probably would end up going between Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. Let's see what happens. Let's see what unfolds. What is clear is that the next 3 or 4 days are going to be absolutely critical for the Conservative Party. And as we were discussing earlier on, if we end up in this scenario where actually it is Sunak versus a Mordaunt or even a Truss, I think there are going to be a lot of disillusioned Conservative Party members, voters, red wallers, GB viewers who may actually be watching this contest and now come to the conclusion that who's speaking for them.
Yeah, and I mean, those who do get through are going to be now facing a series of TV debates. How critical do you think they will be to changing the course of this campaign? Because there's not really anybody in that mix that I look at and think, wow, they've got a really strident personality. They're going to smash it in those debates. Everyone's a lot more pared back. I mean, we are coming off the back of Boris. But how much does personality now count in this?
You know, I was at an event yesterday for a Conservative think tank full of, number 10 staff and key decision makers in the Conservative Party. And their big concern, actually, was just how quickly this contest is happening, just how short and compact it is, because their argument is, look, actually, every candidate here needs to be interrogated. They should all be coming onto GB News and getting the scrutiny that we need, to get the country into a better place. So there's a big concern over the length of the contest. There's a big concern over the lack of ideas. Yeah, there's lots on tax and a little bit on economics, but as you've also said, not much on foreign policy, not much on productivity, not much on levelling up, not much on immigration. Are we comfortable with sustaining net migration at 300,000 a year? These are all big questions that the Conservative grassroots are really going to want to debate when they go out to the country.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we are going to go now to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in Westminster. Darren, what have the mutterings been like in the corridors? All the MPs going to cast their ballots. Are you getting a sense of how things might shape up?
Really fascinating, this, Alex, isn't it? In the sense that I think we're going to get to a stage now where we may well see Rishi Sunak, who's clearly the front runner in terms of MPs at the moment, maybe get into triple digits this afternoon. Of course, to get into the final three, that kind of magic number's around 120. I'm not entirely sure he's going to get there today. That's a kind of given, I think, that Rishi will, still be in a pretty strong position by the results when they come in the next couple of minutes. The really interesting thing is this kind of second place battle, it seems at the moment anyway, between Penny Mordaunt, who clearly is doing very, very well, has got an awful lot of momentum behind her campaign, a lot of enthusiastic supporters who continue to point to opinion polls and opinion.
Well, there they are a bit earlier today, live pictures of people waiting to hear that result, which will be announced by Sir Graham Brady, who is, of course, the current chair of the 1922 committee, the Conservative Party in Westminster's group of MPs, or it's all the MPs who then get to vote and decide who will be their next leader and our future Prime Minister. Coming back to you, Matt. I mean, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about there's been a real paucity in what they're discussing. It's been tax. Basically it's all been tax, hasn't it, in this cost of living crisis? And yet I get the impression that people out there want to have a candidate who isn't just an accountant. They want to actually see a sort of fulsome ideology, something that they can understand what this person's going to do.
I completely agree. They want to see a candidate who believes in the country, who understands where the country is, who wants to make the best out of where we are, who has a long-term vision, who thinks like some of our competitors. You spend a lot of time on this show talking about China, rightly. We need to think more like the Chinese. What's a 10-year strategy? What's a 20-year strategy for this country? Not just how can we get through a difficult winter. And that's what people want to talk about. They want to see somebody with a vision who's compelling. And I think the results here are forthcoming.
Yeah, they'll be here very soon. We're just going to hang on to that for a while. As soon as we see Sir Graham Brady, we will, of course, cut straight to that. Now, one thing that occurs to me as well is that all of these MPs were elected on the 2019 Conservative manifesto. And indeed, Boris Johnson's put forward some pretty strident plans. The Rwandan migrant policy, for example. We haven't heard whether any of these candidates are particularly planning on maintaining those proposals.
Well, we've certainly heard some of them commit to things like the Rwanda policy and like Brexit and maintaining a tough line in the negotiations with regard to Northern Ireland. But we've not really got much of a sense about how they might differ from the 2019 manifesto. So we haven't seen a rejection of that set of policies that delivered that huge majority for Boris Johnson. I don't think those ideas are going to go out, but nor have we seen any of these candidates yet really carve themselves out and say, this is why I'm different. OK, Sunak has said he's not going to go for immediate tax cuts. He's going to sort of keep taxes as they are and gradually bring them in as he sort of deals with inflation and debt. Okay, that's a bit of a difference. But, he's also gone quite hard on some of the issues around women's rights. He's begun to get into some of the sort of culture type stuff that Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman have been in a lot earlier and have been, more willing to embrace those issues. But there isn't really, that much of a compelling vision here that's being offered. I suspect as we get into, the next 2 years when they're in office, remember, they're going straight in as PM. This is huge, right, for some of these candidates. They're going straight in as PM. They will then potentially begin to develop their brief, begin to give the country a sense of who they are and what they're about. But make no mistake, Alex, this is the most fragile place the Conservative Party has been in for a very long time. Whoever wins this is a huge gamble for the Conservative Party. The biggest gamble they've really made since they got rid of Thatcher.
Yeah, no, indeed. Now, Darren, let's go back to you. Talk us through what is about to happen and then what happens thereafter. The results of this second ballot of MPs due any moment.
Yeah, indeed, this is the second round. We're going to hear from Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 Select Committee. That's the governing body of the Parliamentary Conservative Party. And he is going to list out the name of all the candidates in alphabetical order and the number of votes that they have received in this second round. Clearly, it is possible that some MPs who backed different candidates yesterday will have switched their votes today. So it doesn't necessarily mean that all candidates will see their overall total increase. As we saw with Jeremy Hunt yesterday, his vote actually went down. And then the threshold remains at 30. So if 1, 2, 3 candidates, which seems pretty unlikely, get below 30, they're automatically excluded. If everyone gets over the threshold of 30, it is the candidate with the lowest number of votes who gets excluded. And then the other candidates, however many if there are left, move on to the third round, which we're expecting on Monday.
I'm going to interject because Sir Graham Brady's just walked into the room. Let's cross live now to Westminster.
Ballot in the leadership election. As yesterday, I'll read the name of the candidate and the number of votes cast in each case. First of all, 356 votes were cast out of a possible 358. The numbers are as follows: Badenoch, 49, Braverman, 27, Mordaunt, 83, Sunak, 101, Truss, 64, Tugendhat, 32. Therefore, under the rules, Suella Braverman is eliminated from the contest, and the others are able to go forward to a further ballot on Monday. Thank you.
So there we go, that is Sir Graham Brady announcing the results at the 1922 committee of the second round of the Conservative leadership race. That is that Suella Braverman is out of the contest. You are watching GB News. It is 1 minute past 3 o'clock. This is the briefing, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. And there is only one story in town, the continued contest for who will take over as Conservative Party leader and thus also our Prime Minister. We're now down to 5 candidates as we prepare to go into a weekend of TV debates. A very good afternoon and welcome to the programme live from Westminster.
I'm wondering.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. It is 2 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. As I say, we're live outside Parliament. We're on TV, online and indeed on your wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. If you're just tuning in, we've just got the results